The way Formula One imagined it was this. On a Sunday, after a year of intense planning and trying to fill out the stands, hundreds and thousands of people showed up for the Miami GP. The excitement was at a fever pitch. Everyone couldn't wait for the race to begin. We had musicians, we had celebrities, and all of them were jointly united in their effort to present the heroes of the sport, the Formula One drivers. And then, when they announced the names of all their heroes, the crowd went mild. What? What just happened at the Miami GP? Yes, Max Verstappen won a race. That tends to happen. Yes, Kevin Magnussen eventually lost to Charles Leclerc, which is a little bit painful in my eyes. But the crowd went mild, Kunal. There was no reaction whatsoever. The dream race, was it as dreamy as they thought it would be?
It depends who you ask, because the Miami GP promoters actually stepped back and said, wow, we are experiencing great interest and maybe we should turn it into a night race, and conversations are going. And I'm like, we are soon going to have a day when a promoter says we are not a street race and we're not going to run it right at night. And then having a day race in a traditional circuit will be news. That's the future of where it's going to go. But I have to ask, you said the crowds were there in hundreds and thousands. You know, usually there is an official report. I'm sure there will be one from Miami as well. But I'd love to know if the crowd actually built up after the 40% discounts that came up, Somil.
Who knows? But well, there's one thing that was for sure. We saw so much of chaos in the race. And the one big question on everyone's mind is, was it really a good race? Now, that answer depends from person to person. We can also then talk about, was it a good spectacle? There's this to talk about. There's so much on the strategy, so much on overtaking, so much on Lewis Hamilton and all the other stuff from the Miami GP as well. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is the Inside Line F1 podcast. My name is Somal Arora. I am the host of the Indian Racing League broadcasts on Star Sports. And joining me as always is Kunal Shah, the former marketing head of the Sahara Force India Formula One team, who is now an FIA-accredited Formula One journalist for the Viaplay network. And now, Kunal, we're going to have Bob Varsha on the podcast next week to discuss the stories of Miami on the ground. But from what we looked at from behind, what a crazy race, huh? We saw so many overtakes. We saw Verstappen win from P9. But arguably the most interesting part of the entire race was Jackie Stewart not being allowed to meet Roger Federer because the security didn't really know who he was. Jackie Stewart.
I loved how he just barged his way through. It's like how racing car drivers are. You don't give them room, they will create room for themselves, and that's what Sir Jackie Stewart did. And in the preview episode, we actually spoke of look out for Martin Brundle's grid walk. And that's what we are now discussing, looking out for Martin Brundle's grid walk, right? So it was pretty epic. I mean, Roger Federer, he said on the grid itself that he's a big fan of Formula One. He was supporting Mercedes because he's an ambassador of Mercedes, blah, 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 etc. But it was actually nice to see so many celebrities come out and say they're fans, support the sport, etc., etc. And I normally love this spillover of entertainment, music, arts, sports, everybody, etc., coming to Formula One. Two of the richest individuals in the world, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, were there. Expectedly, Elon quickly took to Twitter, said, great conversations around battery and aero, and I would love to see a pure EV versus a hybrid, car race at some point. And, promptly Formula E jumped in and said, hey guys, don't forget we are here. But, but let's get to, the Miami Grand Prix, Samuel. Was it a good race? Was it a good spectacle? Was it a bit of both? I'd love to know your take.
What I really love the most is the spectacle part. Let's start over there. We will get to the racing, and trust me, there's so much of technical fun stuff to talk about. But I want to start out with the whole idea that's been sold around the Miami GP, right? We often expect that when people show up to an event, they will make noise, and that didn't really work out. So I'm just baffled, right? I love the idea of Formula One going silly with the driver introductions. They must. That's how you sell a sport. But the wrong choice of... I don't know why I'm going so critical into this, but just the wrong choice of music really flattened everything. And so, Kunal, the only time that they actually made noise was for Lewis Hamilton. But that's the truth. Formula One would like you to believe that they made noise otherwise as well, but it looked like they were actually piping in fake crowd noise because who on earth cheers for Nico Hulkenberg? And they had noise when Nico Hulkenberg walked in.
I cheer for Nico Hulkenberg. Let me
Hey,
remind you.
all the way from Austin to Miami, I don't think that noise came in that loudly. It was ridiculously loud. I was like, what? Hulkenberg? Why?
Maybe the local flavor, he's got the name Hulk going, etc., etc. Could be any of that. But, I personally loved the driver introductions that they did. You're right, they should do it for every race. Even though most drivers turned around and said, please do not do it for every race. But, Fernando Alonso actually made a very interesting point. He said, I want them to do it for every race because the fans in Miami are no different or no more or less special than the fans in Japan or Imola or Spain and the likes. And I completely
Wait,
agree
wait,
with
wait,
that.
wait, wait, wait. No, 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 Kunal. No, you're wrong. Formula One is going to come out and march to your door and probably shoot you in the head. What do you mean the fans in Miami are no different? They're the best fans. What do you mean? They
Just
deserve
the
three
way
races. Nobody else does.
just the way the fans of Japan are the best fans and the fans in Sanfut are the best fans. And depends which fans actually paid 40% off or not, because that's usually the best fan segregation. That's the marketer in me talking, right? But you know I think I liked the music. I liked the way the drivers were introduced, and Mitsila and I were watching it together, and she actually made a good point that for a lot of these new fans who are coming, who are experiencing, who are on the periphery, on the fence, going there because friends are going, family is going. It's a great way and a short, to offer a short introduction to all the drivers you'll sort of see out, because when you see the drivers on track in the car, they are with a helmet. So you don't really see them. You see their helmet, right? And
Hmm.
there are ever changing helmet designs. So after a point, I'm literally guessing which driver is which because everybody's got new helmets, right? But more to the point, it was like Drive to Survive kind of presentations in real life. And I don't mind that. I mean, if the sport has embraced Drive to Survive in the way it has, why not do it on track as well? That was where I was coming from.
Exactly. And what I loved the most about it, apart from the fact that they chose probably the lowest and most mellow music to introduce the most exciting drivers, they had a conductor. And the conductor, Kunal, was conducting the grand total of nothing. That was amazing. He was just waving his hands over there. Everyone had their iPads, everyone had their musical notes lined up, everyone was playing what they had to play. The conductor over there was in this really weird jacket that had a Mercedes logo, a time logo. It's like, what on earth are you trying to be, my friend? Why are you here? What are you doing? But I guess so, because why not? And that added to the entire spectacle of it. I love how over the top it is. I'm not saying this because I have to say this. It's just genuinely amazing that Formula One, for once, makes an effort. And that is interesting. But on that effort front as well, Kunal, when we saw the drivers heading into the cool down room, they had a big jersey with the name of all the three drivers and their exact positions printed out in the back. So now I'm wondering, how many jerseys has Formula One actually made that way? Have they made three jerseys for Max? So Verstappen P1, P2, P3. Have they made a jersey for Logan Sargent as well? Like in case Logan Sargent randomly comes up on the podium? So how many jerseys have Formula One invested their money into? That's just interesting.
I'm not going to run the calculations in this, given how it is actually possible to do that math. But no, I get a feeling, and I hope they didn't really run so many jerseys because it is possible to do that as well, given the whole sustainability, net zero carbon thing, etc. But maybe it was one of those, stickers that you can just iron over, and then it looks
Oh yeah.
it was done. And just so that everybody knows, this wasn't fixed, because that's something that a lot of people could have also imagined. Did they know beforehand this is what the finishing positions are going to be? But all 20 drivers finished the race. Even though I think it was a good spectacle and a good race, Somil, and we'll sort of get to that. There was no safety car or virtual safety car for the first time at a race in 2023. I think the bigger spectacle actually was also that the marina did not have water this year as well, despite the organizers claiming otherwise. But thank you for saving all that water. Uh, It's only after F1 went to Miami did we know of more details around Brad Pitt's movie as well. The fact that he's done 1,000 odd kilometers in an F2 car, and Mercedes is involved in, or has been involved in, helping him cloak an F2 car with F1 bodywork, so it looks like that. I don't know why, but I loved Colton Herta saying, "Oh my God, so Brad Pitt got a super license before I did."
It's kind of silly, but I think it's good. We need that to happen. And when ESPN Formula One broke the headline that Brad Pitt will be driving alongside all the Formula One drivers at the British GP, I honestly felt like punching them in the face. Really, I mean, let's just say it as it is. How stupid can you be to publish that headline? Come on, man. That's fact check. Really, just for this. And they said it was an error. It wasn't an error, Kunal. Really, it clearly wasn't an error, was it?
you know Social media, we all do this for clicks. That's the essential metric. How much reach, how many clicks, how many likes, will people follow us, blah blah blah. But I'm excited to see what and how they portray Formula One in that movie. And it's Brad Pitt. Lewis Hamilton is the F1 consultant to the movie, etc. But enough of that. There was a spectacle in Miami. Let's go to that. We will discuss Apex. I'm told is going to be the name of the movie if it comes, when it comes. So is he going to miss the Apex or not? Because that's another podcast that people can listen to, right? But there was actually there were two FI errors, by the way, before we sort of go there. When Lando Norris entered the pit, there was a person just crossing the fast lane. It was caught on his onboard camera. So that was one. And I say this because we saw what happened in Azerbaijan as well with Esteban Ocon, right? And there was one more incident. Yes. So Charles Leclerc, when he crashed an FP2 and his car was being towed back on the tow truck or the pickup truck, the truck was on track while the Porsche cars were doing, I believe, reconnaissance laps. I hope it was a reconnaissance lap and not the race in itself. But again, just one of those things I believe that there was in terms of FIA's misses.
I think they took the street race element of it very, very seriously with that. So, there's a car that's been picked up by a truck. There's other Porsche cars that are racing alongside. Yeah, it's totally normal. Everything is cool. Street race. No, you wanted a street race. Here you are. Totally get that on the track. But speaking of the race, Kunal, the most important part about the entire weekend, I think it's time we finally get to that. Charles Leclerc has passed Kevin Magnussen. He finished ahead. What an amazing battle. And that loops me on to the entire discussion about overtakes, because for once we saw many overtakes, but it seems like people online aren't very happy with the race. Did you like it? Because I really enjoyed the show. I think not every lap has to be a Kawabunga kind of thing where it needs some sort of action or some sort of red flag all the way through. Because the grid positions were very mixed up and they were not orthodox in that nature. We saw lots of strategic changes because some teams had to do things like Verstappen starting on the hards, right? Just add some degree of variation to it. But the fact was that they were able to overtake in Miami, and that is unlike Baku, where we were just stuck up to dry. So even with the overtaking, firstly, did you like the show? And B, just why were they able to overtake so much better when the cars are the same, the drivers are the same, and net circuit characteristics in terms of just track design on a 2D point of view are similar?
It's a very interesting point. We all in Formula One have Charles Leclerc to thank because he had two crashes in 2 days, FP2 and then the more important one in qualifying. And then it sort of bunched up the entire grid. Everybody was out of place. Lewis was out of place. Max was out of place, etc., etc. And then what forced people on the Sunday during the race is to try different strategies. So the overtaking was, of course, courtesy Max Verstappen. He was driving past people as though they didn't exist. I think he was already in the podium positions by lap 14. Isn't that what he said in the cool-down room? He told Fernando Alonso, who's driver number 14 on the car, that he overtook him on lap number 14, right? So 14 is a number that sticks around with Fernando. So I think first was, of course, Max, and then the second reason why things actually happened on track was tire strategy. People were out of place, so they were forced to think differently with tire strategy, and tire strategy gave drivers a different advantage or different delta at different points of time in the race, so they could end up making an overtake. And for once, there isn't a post race discussion on shorter DRS straights, because
Oh, thank
F1
goodness.
has, yeah, thank goodness. And, F1 has a problem if the conversation before and after most races is going to be, is the DRS zone long enough for overtaking or not? Because imagine this, there's a 6 kilometer long circuit, and then all that people are talking of is that 100 or 75 meters that is shortened. I mean, how important is that small, really small piece of tarmac when you compare it to a 6 kilometer long circuit? But my belief in general, Somil, is that overtaking is a challenge in Formula One. And if I can maybe just backtrack a little bit, 2022, the new rules were brought in to bunch up the field, right? And to make following easier and the likes. It did bunch up the field, as you could see, in qualifying. P1 to P20 was just 1.2 seconds, which I think is fantastic. And,
Yeah.
P20 was Logan Sargent, who's driving for the first time in Miami, etc., etc. I'm not taking anything away from his talent. Just trying to say that uh, the gap from P1 to P20 being 1.2 seconds is very impressive, right? So barring Red Bull Racing in the race pace, everybody is so well bunched up that there were times when Yuki Tsunoda was running in the points, when Kevin Magnussen and the Haas's were running in the points, and the likes, right? So just just a matter of fact that different drivers are able to run because the field is bunched up. But that is what is creating the problem when it comes to overtakes. The delta you need to overtake doesn't exist anymore because everybody's so bunched up. And if you go back and listen to the episodes for the last 2 or 3 races, especially when you say Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin, they have been finishing in positions they have, started in or settled in after a pit stop. That's why track position, qualifying position is so vital in such a tight field.
It is, and that is what made Miami such an interesting race. Because let's be honest, who were the primary? Sorry, what's happening here? The P alliteration has really gotten to me this time. It's funny. Something or the other does. This time it's the P. Let's get back in. The primary protagonists, I've done it, for this race in terms of the action were Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc and Kevin Magnussen. Now, Magnussen and Leclerc obviously had their own battle. That was amazing to watch. Verstappen, let's keep him aside because, again, that was inevitable because he was starting in P9. But I want to touch up upon Lewis Hamilton. He genuinely had a car that was capable of, let's say, P4, P5 on merit had he qualified a little up ahead. Now, we all know what happened on Saturday, but of a technical issue on that front, they weren't able to get the right lap in. And so he was stuck in P13, which made the fact that he had to overtake a new reality for him. And so that added some layer of fun into it, that Lewis Hamilton was constantly trying to get past all the other drivers, but initially couldn't. And then in the second stint of the race, he was actually able to do that. So if you account for, if you had like a virtual drama index, and if you see who all contributed to it, it's mostly drivers who are out of position. Your Leclercs, your Magnussens, your Verstappens, your Hamilton. And so, hypothetically, if you take away Leclerc's crash in Q3, it obviously wouldn't be as exciting of a race because people would be in their normal orders and they would have their normal routine strategy to follow. But I think for once, it's great because we got a good show out of it. But it doesn't change the fact that in the long run, Kunal, as you rightly mentioned, we do have a problem. And even if they can overtake, that's not really the point, right? Because not all overtakes are fun. Like look at Max Verstappen getting past the field, especially that move on Pierre Gasly. Nothing to worry about, nothing to do. I don't think that's entertaining enough in my mind. But again, the way things worked out, I think there's not much that we can complain about from Miami in that perspective, right? We got a
Absolutely.
we got a battle for the win. We saw some amazing battles in the midfield, some proper wheel-to-wheel racing as well, and we also saw a double overtake from Max Verstappen too. So that checks everyone's boxes. So I kind of don't get why people are unhappy on the internet, really.
I
Oh
think
wait,
if they're just
are people on the internet always unhappy? I think that's a general theme as well, right?
or let's just get them to watch the Monaco E-Prix, where there were 116 overtakes on Saturday in Monaco, right? But anyway, we'll talk about the E-Prix later. You mentioned a few very important points. It wasn't fun to watch Max Verstappen overtake, was it? Because he had so much of an advantage. No one wanted to fight Max Verstappen. no one is able to fight Max Verstappen or Red Bull in this case. And I think both scenarios are actually a fail for Formula One, because essentially you want people to be going wheel to wheel and the likes. But, so in one case, if it was just Max overtaking, I can understand people were bored because like he just drove past. But there were overtakes otherwise. I mean, Kevin Magnussen and Charles Leclerc, two drivers who otherwise wouldn't get to battle. Magnussen would let Leclerc through and then be able to overtake him the next corner. And those battles, along with Mercedes as well, were pretty fantastic. And let me also, I found some information about tire strategy. Okay, the drivers who made the biggest gains in the race, right? And I'm going to name them. There was 8 places gained by Max Verstappen, 7 places gained by Lewis Hamilton, 6 places gained by Yuki Tsunoda and Lance Stroll. All these drivers started on the hard tire and then switched to the medium. Okay, so that's point number 1. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. Of all the drivers who started on the medium tire, which was basically what most drivers did, George Russell was the only driver who actually gained 2 places, right? Which actually is a good indication that the Mercedes came alive in the race. And it could have been that it was helped by the overnight rain that sort of brought the circuit temperatures a little lower. So that probably worked in Mercedes' favor. The other driver who actually started on the medium but did not gain or lose a place was Charles Leclerc. Somil, every other driver who started on the medium lost position. And I'm going to read out some names. Perez lost a position. Alonso lost a position. Sainz was 2 positions down. Gasly was 3. Bottas, Albon, Hulkenberg, 3 positions down. Nick De Vries, 3 positions down. So what in effect is that the hard medium strategy was the correct strategy. And that's why, it also became so much easier for Max Verstappen, because when Perez had the medium, it was a greener track. It was higher fuel load. He was saying his mediums were splitting apart, etc., etc. So, tire strategy worked, which I think was very good. But it was, could there be more variation? That's probably what people are maybe questioning.
Wait, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Lewis Hamilton went on a medium hard, didn't he, eventually?
No, Hamilton started on the hard tire first. He was on the hard, and then closer to lap 37, 38, he went onto the medium tire.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's worked out in that sense, where I didn't initially expect the hard to be the right tire to start on. I thought they'd also be going on the mediums initially and then later on, just like Baku, going for the hards. But that's what the change in grid conditions does to you, where you have to take unconventional measures. And that really worked out well in Max's favor. And I think now that we're at that stage, Kunal, let's also dedicate a minute to the winner. I know we don't like to talk about Max a lot for a reason.
I love to talk about him.
No, I mean, we all know that he's so great, right? So great to the point that you don't really have to speak about it. It's like a universal truth now that Max Verstappen is the top level Formula One driver. And that stint on the hards, Kunal, was just beyond me. How he was able to get past so many people and at the same time not lose any time at all. In fact, end up gaining quite a fair bit on Checo, who in fact was also in clear air and had the softer tires. And he also has so-called a knack to manage tires better. So that in my head was like, wow, that was a stint, Max. And the way he was just able to cruise past later on just shows that he had so much more pace remaining in the bank. So it's just beyond me what Max can do. And I just keep on getting pleasantly surprised about how good the guy is.
Max is on the, well, maybe off track as well. I love the fact that he doesn't expose his life so much like so many other drivers, right? Okay, but I think Max made just one wrong move all weekend, and that was in qualifying when he couldn't put a banker lap in, when he ran wide through turns 5, 6, 7 in Q3. That was his only wrong move. Driver number 33, which is his original number, finished 33 seconds ahead of George Russell in 4th place. And since I keep quoting numbers, I said I should sort of quote that. And George Russell, I mentioned that he was the only medium runner to finish higher than where he started. I love 2 things that he did. First was when he got and he overtook Pierre Gasly just when Max Verstappen overtook him as well. And Mercedes, his race engineer, George Russell's race engineer, actually told him to do that. He said, "Let's follow Max through. Let's go and get Pierre Gasly." And when I heard it, I was laughing. I said, "That's very bold." And George actually said, "You're making it sound simpler than it actually is." But George Russell actually delivered on that. And that's why there was a radio exchange on the broadcast where George said, "I should listen to my engineer more often." That's the joke behind the scenes, right? And then, of course, we had Russell and Hamilton swapping, Hamilton doing a lot of positioning, saying, "I'm not going to let him by. He can go by if he wants," etc. We didn't hear what Mercedes said in response, because a few moments later, we actually saw that Lewis Hamilton let George Russell by, which actually helped George climb up to fourth place because they were on different strategies.
And it was a great race from George Russell. And apparently, things are only going to get better from here if you are to believe what Mercedes are saying, because they're saying that the Imola upgrade will prove why this Mercedes is so poisonous and we're going to fix it. They used the exact word, Kunal. They said, this Mercedes is poisonous. Not bad, not bad. It's been slowly sucking the life out of Lewis Hamilton, but it didn't quite seem like it because, again, one point that really intrigued me was that if Mercedes had so much pace, were they just genuinely that good? Or were they actually just poorly positioned in qualifying? For Lewis especially. Because for me, I felt that, okay, they could be thereabouts where George was, but it was just artificially made more exciting and artificially made to look better because Lewis was lower down. So it felt like, hey, he's got a lot more pace. Whereas they just did what they have been doing so far.
Mercedes have, historically struggled in Miami. They had a similar situation last year, only one car into Q3, etc. So, by the way, their porpoising was back, which is why they had to raise the car and lose more performance, etc., etc. And very interestingly, Mercedes has just said, like you said, that the W14 is poisonous. The corporate PR will come for their necks, I believe, if they were to say this Mercedes is poisonous. So very interesting how they do not say the name of the car, but say the chassis name, number, whatever you call it.
Interesting. Now, folks, it's time to get a lowdown on the numbers behind the Miami GP. And for that, we've got F1 Stats Guru right here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's listen in to the stats review by F1 Stats Guru.
Hey folks, it's time to do the stats review of the Miami Grand Prix. My name is Sundaram, also known as the F1 Stats Guru on the internet. A masterclass of a race by Max Verstappen yet again, and it always throws up some very interesting stats and facts. So why don't we just dig in straight into the numbers? Now, the one thing that you've probably already heard of is that Max Verstappen is now part of a small club of drivers who've won from P9. It's not always easy to win from P9, but the way Max Verstappen has been going, it all seems a little too easy. The last driver to win from P9 was actually Niki Lauda in 1984, almost 4 decades, and only 5 drivers overall have done this in the history of the sport. And with that, Verstappen has now equaled Sebastian Vettel as the joint most successful driver for the Red Bull team. Vettel took 38 wins during his time with this team, and surely Verstappen is going to be going a lot more higher than that considering his contract ends in only 2028. That also means that Red Bull have now won the first 5 races of the season. The interesting thing is, whenever a team has won the first 5 races of a season, they have always won both titles later that year. It's happened 6 times until now. The most recent team to do it was actually Mercedes in 2014 and 2019. And the big question is, when is Red Bull going to take those championships this year? It's going to be an interesting prediction to make. But another driver that was in the mix, obviously not for the race win, but for the podium, was Fernando Alonso. He's now taken 4 podiums in the first 5 races of the season, definitely enjoying himself in that Aston Martin. But it also means that this is the first time that a team apart from Red Bull, Mercedes or Ferrari has made it to the podium in the United States. It was always a country that was being dominated by the big 3 in the last several years, but now we have a 4th team to that as well. And the last stat of today is about Pierre Gasly. He started from 4th and he eventually finished 8th, but he is going to be a delighted driver because after 5 attempts, he's finally scored on US soil. He finally gets 4 points. I'm sure he's going to be very, very pleased with that now that the team also has a double points finish after a few difficult races. Well, that was the stats review. I hope you folks enjoy that. For more such interesting stats and facts, don't forget to follow me on my Twitter and Instagram under the name F1 Stats Guru. I'll see you folks in a couple of weeks.
Welcome back into the Inside Line F1 podcast, ladies and gentlemen. And we were on the subject of discussing the Miami GP. And There's one very important aspect that we can't quite miss out on. Fernando Alonso too, Kunal, just like us, was enjoying the show. He actually watched I was about to say Lance Verstappen for some weird reason, but he was actually watching Lance Stroll make a move on other drivers while driving in the car. So that just makes me wonder, where was he watching from? Did he actually look from the corner of his eye and maybe look at a TV screen, or did he just see it in front? Because as far as I know, I don't think Fernando was even in the same sector as Lance Stroll. So the fact that he can actually look at the TV, watch, and then make a comment on that as well just is incredible to me about the kind of mental capabilities that Fernando has. So it just makes me think, what car actually takes the 100% from Fernando? Or can it ever even happen? Like, can he be 100% involved in it, or will he always have some spare capacity? I know it's a trade of the best, like Michael Schumacher always used to have it as well, but how? How do you have so much mental capability?
This reminds me of Lewis Hamilton's incident in qualifying. I think it was behind Kevin Magnussen. Lewis was probably looking at his dash or adjusting something, and he almost didn't see that Magnussen had come to a standstill because a car ahead of him had come standstill, and then he had to sort of go on the curb between Magnussen and the wall and clip his wing and whatever, right? Just remember that these drivers are able to do so much more while driving the car at those speeds, Fernando Alonso included. Of course, Fernando did say that in the slow speed sections of the Miami GP circuit, there are TV screens that he could see things, and that's how he sort of saw Lance Stroll. For once, I almost thought that maybe Aston Martin has given him a Stroll camera on his dashboard where he's able to sort of look at Stroll, and like Max Verstappen said, you're like Lance Stroll's life coach. Because last race it was try my brake bias. Now it's like, hey, good move. What position is he in, and whatever. I was glad that Fernando Alonso was so chirpy and enjoying the entertainment, because we didn't see Taylor Swift. I mean, if there was one race, she's got 1 out of 3 chances to make it to an American Grand Prix. She's sort of let go of the first one. So, that was. I was hoping to see Taylor Swift there, and if she would probably be on the grid along with Martin Brundle or not, or what. But yeah, that was one of those things. You know, Fernando Alonso has scored 15 points in every race this season. That's one of the things I wrote down. It was his 4th P3 finish, and while we're talking of Fernando, let's also discuss how Lance Stroll's weaknesses were exposed by a circuit like Miami. Low grip, maybe different tarmac that he doesn't like, something. Because in Q1, he was out. And then, yes, he was battling in the race, but he never sort of was able to make up positions in the race, despite being the one who actually, started on the hard tire. He made up 6 positions, like I said, but hey, he didn't get into the points.
And the interesting part behind why he couldn't quite make up positions, and actually why he started there in the first place, was that Aston Martin didn't really put him on a fresh set of tyres in Q1. And the reason behind that, Kanal, is because they thought that they were good enough to make sure that they could get ahead into Q2 on the old set as well. And for the first time ever, I think we've seen a degree of overconfidence with Aston Martin. And it's funny how expectations can change just after 5 good races.
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Mike Crack, in his post-qualifying press release, says, we didn't get the right strategy. But the strangest part, Somil, is Fernando Alonso was on the same strategy. Single set of tires from Q1. He made it to Q2. The gap between Alonso and Stroll was 2/10 only. So that was not like Stroll had a really bad lap. But guess what? When the field is so bunched up, 2/10 is a massive gap. It's a difference between going into Q2 and then getting eliminated in Q1. So technically, Aston Martin had the right strategy. They just didn't have both their drivers deliver. Or, I don't know if I'm going to be too critical of Lance Stroll, but let's leave it at that.
No, wait, but isn't that the wrong strategy? Because the strategy should, in fact, be aligned towards a certain driver and their capabilities. So if you know by a general metric that Lance Stroll is at least a tenth and a half slower than Fernando Alonso, probably you should account for it. But again, I'm the couch warrior over here, so it's probably easy for me to say that. But crazy how just one minor error in qualifying can have such a huge impact on the overall race. And so Aston Martin have seen their gap to Mercedes been shortened because
or
Mercedes have
5
had the chip.
points or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's fun now, Kunal, because we have a three-way fight for P2. So I wouldn't say Formula One is just becoming boring. It's just that the action on track isn't quite complementing the amazing battles off it. And I think heading into the next couple of races, it should be very, very fun to watch how this very special battle plays out. And also how Sergio Perez can actually fight back. Because F1 Stats Guru, again, uncovered an amazing stat that it's just been Verstappen, Perez, Verstappen, Perez, Verstappen, Perez in terms of race wins all along. So could we be seeing a Sergio Perez win in the next one? I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but I find it funny how something or the other has been going wrong for Max every weekend in terms of qualifying or the race. So fun times, I'd say.
Yeah, and the gap between Aston Martin and Mercedes is just 6 points. Aston Martin has seen Fernando Alonso do most of the heavy lifting. Fernando Alonso has actually, if we were to look at it, he scored 75 of the team's 102 points. Okay, but that's again something you would expect. Lance Stroll had one race where he did not finish because of reliability reasons, and then yesterday he finished but didn't score points. It was actually the first race where Aston Martin had both cars finish but scored points with just one of them. And I think the only other team I believe I want to still talk about and just going to quickly run through them is McLaren. Double Q1 elimination, no points scored at all. They're lying fifth in the Constructors' Championship, on equal points with Alpine. And they have actually scored points in just three or rather two out of the five races that have happened till date. But Oscar Piastri, he had a long brake pedal. He had brake issues, which then compounded into other issues, including a lot of fuel saving. Interestingly, for Lando Norris, they had swapped on track because Norris didn't have as many issues that, say, Piastri did. Lando Norris has scored in just two out of the five races. Interestingly, even then, he's ninth in the Drivers' Championship. That's how closely fought the battle is between the top four teams. Okay. And Norris has scored in two out of the five races, and in the other three races, he's finished 17th, Samuel. That's how much the gap can be.
Ridiculous, frankly. Seriously, it's amazing how close the field is bunched up that even a minor off day can really get to you. And that is what really excites me. Excites me. Yes, that excites me quite a fair bit. That's a new word that I've invented today on the Inside Line F1 podcast. But that is what really excites me all the way through, Kunal, that McLaren are seeing an upturn in pace. They are seeing a new upgrade coming that's affecting their car. But the fact that all the upgrades and all the cars' performance is so track specific as well makes it such an interesting season to follow. And all of that and more shall be discussed in future episodes. But yeah, I think we're now heading into a good direction in terms of the racing with Formula One. Just that the on-track action should follow suit, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and you know what? In all of this, we forgot to speak about Ferrari. I'm sure they're not pleased about that because they use Formula One to market their road cars. Literally speaking, we spoke of Leclerc. Ferrari were done in by their tire degradation, if one may put it as that, and that was the long and short of what it was. So, like Frederick Vasseur said, they were up there in qualifying. They should have been up there, but then in the race pace, they just chew up their tires more than pretty much everyone else. And in the first five races, there have been only four drivers to have scored points in all of them. The two Red Bull drivers, clearly, because they've had, 4 1-2 finishes, right? And Alonso and Hamilton.
Interesting. Crazy how it's going out eventually. And yeah, it's just dominance all the way through from Red Bull's point of view. But will it be retained? Will we ever see Aston Martin come to that stage? We'll wait and see. But what's next on the Inside Line F1 podcast is something very, very exciting for us, because coming on to the show next week is going to be the voice of Formula One in America, Bob Varsha, who was on ground for the Miami GP. And he comes on the show to share his stories about the entire weekend, how he saw the racing action over there, and also more on the spectacle of the Miami GP and what it feels like to be there from a media capacity on ground as well. All of that and more is going to be a part of the Inside Line F1 podcast. So if you like what we're serving over here, feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with all your friends and family members, and also be back for the next ones. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we shall be back. Take care.